Hello, everybody, and welcome to Perspectives. Glad you're with us today. We've got several things I think are going to be of pretty solid interest, things you'll want to know about. But first, I'm going to preach a minute. You already know what our brothers and sisters are going through in the California fires. You already know that they're just dazed. They're living in the streets, some cases. There are volunteers coming from every state in the union to help them. People who can cook, people who are bringing food to cook, people who started a clothing drive, all kinds of things are underway. Now, with a tragedy like this, the worms come out of the woodwork. We also have people that are trying to get your money. They want you to send your money to them so they can, quote, distribute it the way it should be distributed. Do not fall for that. If you have any doubts about what to do with your dollars, your hard-earned income, and you want to donate it to the victims of the California fires, might I suggest go through your church or your synagogue or your mosque. More often than not, the leaders of those three organizations will know exactly where the money should go, how to get it to the folks who can do the most good with it, and nobody takes anything out of it. Everybody works very hard to get things underway and where they're supposed to be. So don't be sucked in by politicians that say, send the money to us and we'll get it there. And by that, I mean former office holders. A couple of them are already out there beating the drum for the dollar, and I don't want you to fall for that because those dollars will not end up where they're supposed to. Now, let's get down to the business at hand, because today's episode is going to open with Katie Dilks, who's Executive Director of the Oklahoma Access to Justice Foundation. And what is that, Katie?
Thanks for having me, Sam. I'm really excited to be here. The Oklahoma Access to Justice Foundation is a small nonprofit that works in civil justice. So we like to say that we're trying to improve meaningful access in a fair and accessible civil justice system. And if you sort of take that a step at a time, we're trying to make sure that our courts and legal systems work for the people who need them, when they need them, in a way that they can afford, understand, and truly use. And when we're thinking about civil justice, it's really everything people need our legal system for that's not getting arrested, right? We don't touch criminal. We've got a ton of people in the state who do really effective criminal justice reform, but we're talking about housing law, family law, guardianship, divorce, disputes with neighbors, small claims, debt. All of those things fall in the civil justice system, and we're just trying to make sure that systems actually work for people.
That covers a lot of ground.
Sure does.
I did not know until I looked at some of the advance information I got from you that we have such a drastic shortage of affordable places to live.
Yeah.
And it's not just Tulsa, it's all over the country, isn't it?
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time over the past several years working on eviction and eviction response specifically because it has such dramatic impacts on folks' lives, safety, stability. And our eviction crisis in this state stems, I think, from a lot of different causes, but one of those causes absolutely is just our shortage of available affordable housing. Some estimates across the state right now are that we're 77,000 units short of the affordable housing that we need to make sure that everybody can actually have a place to live that they can afford.
Does Oklahoma have a law in place, I know California does, where people who have affordable places to live suddenly jack up their prices?
Oh, like a rent control law?
Yeah.
We do not have a rent control law. No, there's anything determining rent is just a contract between a landlord and a tenant, and they can set it at whatever they think people will be willing to pay.
So no one from the legislature has stepped up to take this on?
Not on that issue, no.
Not on that, okay. There's a thing called an eviction lab. What is that?
So Eviction Lab is out of Princeton University, and they have been studying the impacts of eviction, the demographics of eviction, the causes of eviction, and some of the ways that we maybe could stem the flood of eviction really that our country sees for the past several years. Matthew Desmond, who people may know, is the author of Evicted, and recently the author of Poverty by America, heads up that lab and has really spearheaded a lot of the research around eviction that we've been able to build on over the past decade or so. They published some rankings of cities across the country in 2016 based on their eviction rates. And in that, Tulsa was number 11 in the country in terms of our eviction rate, and Oklahoma City was number 20.
When you have children involved, what happens to a child, period, when, and I'm assuming here, the majority of the folks who are evicted are either single parent, single mothers. What happens to that child down the road when he or she is forced to go through repeated evictions?
Yeah, it has huge impacts. We know it negatively impacts their health. We know it negatively impacts academic outcomes. Often kids struggle to finish school because they may be having to change schools multiple times even within a year. So it's really hard to build those trusted relationships with your teachers or with your school communities. But we also know from some of the research that the Eviction Lab and others have done that people tend to move to less safe neighborhoods and less safe housing. Every time you're evicted, it's usually a downgrade in the quality of your living circumstances, which also then contributes to those health concerns, those academic concerns, and other things, in addition to just losing your friends and neighbors and the social support network you might have around you.
Not to mention the slow development of that child in terms of mental development. There's food insecurity involved here. How does one beat back the forces of evil, if you will, on this eviction problem? If it's not just here, it's everywhere.
It is everywhere, but it's not consistent everywhere. So I think that's actually a really interesting thing we can look at, is what states have higher and lower eviction rates and what are the things that lead to that. Because the answer honestly is policy, right? There are policy choices that lead to direct relationships on eviction rates. It does tie in often with demand for apartments, sort of what your supply availability is, but it's also directly tied to things like the eviction filing fee, what the timeline is for eviction. Our eviction filing fee is $58, and it's been $58 since 2003. It's one of the cheaper filing fees in the country. And when they've done research on this, they find a pretty direct connection between filing fee and eviction rate. When it costs more to file an eviction, landlords are less likely to do it.
You mentioned that there's a high and a low involved in this statistically. Who has the lowest eviction rate in the country?
Oh, I think it's Connecticut, if I'm remembering correctly. But it's not just a sort of a demographic thing where, you know, maybe the richer states have lower eviction rates, or maybe the more progressive states that we think of would have lower rates. Alabama actually has really low eviction rates. And one of the reasons Alabama has really low eviction rates is because it costs $300 to file an eviction in Alabama. So landlords there try every other tool at their disposal to try to work something out with the tenant before resorting to an eviction.
And do you know off the top of your head who has the highest?
I believe at last count, the highest rate was Maryland. And again, it's because of their filing fee. Up until just last year, it cost $15 to file an eviction in Maryland. And it meant you had some apartment complexes that had 300% filing rates, where basically every single person in that complex would get filed on multiple times in a year.
No kidding. I had no idea the problem was this vast and this widespread.
Yeah.
Any idea on numbers of children involved? How many are we talking about?
It can be a little hard to measure because we don't have great demographic data tied up with our court data, but there's actually a really fascinating project that's been happening in Tulsa, led by Impact Tulsa, that has looked specifically at Tulsa public school data and cross-referenced that with court records. And what they've found based on that alert system is that over about a 3.5-year period, just over 4,000 evictions were filed on households containing TPS kids. It was about 2,900 individual children who were impacted by those filings. The reason you've got that discrepancy between the number of filings and the number of kids is that obviously you have some households with multiple kids, but you also had a lot of households with multiple filings.
Do you have a website?
I do. Ours is okaccesstojustice.org.
So they can just go to that and probably learn a heck of a lot more than
Absolutely. We actually wrote a research report 2 years ago on eviction that has a lot of this information as well.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming in to kind of open our eyes to it. I wish I hadn't heard this. I wish I didn't.
Yeah.
I won't go to bed tonight thinking about it, because I will, but I'll especially go to bed thinking about the children. That's criminal.
Yeah.
Absolutely criminal.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you for coming by.
Thank you for having me. I was really happy to be
Maybe
here.
down the road, if things start to change one way or the other, could you come back?
Absolutely. Happy to.
You're on. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with more right after this. Ann Money is director of the Education and Research Area at the Oklahoma Aquarium, and she's here with us now to talk about their new Aquatic Research Center. Ann, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good to have you here, kiddo. What are we talking about here? A $10 million facility?
Yeah, so our first building we ever built on the campus was so that we could get a collection of bull sharks from Florida. And we had to build it fairly quickly, but saltwater is extremely hard on things. So we really needed to build a new large animal holding, is what the current building is called. But in doing that, we've done so many research projects now, and we're still doing so many research projects. We really decided to make it a full research center. So I'm a coral researcher, so I am personally extremely excited, and we do a lot of bull shark research.
Help me understand. What sort of research are we talking about, and what's the purpose?
So I'll start with the coral research. We look at color of coral and fluorescence specifically in coral as an indicator of coral health. And we look at the relationship between the algae that lives inside of the coral that gives it most of its nutrients and the coral animal itself. So corals are not doing well globally. We've lost about 50% of all coral. And every year, the sea surface temperatures are getting warmer, which is what causes what are called bleaching events. So what we're doing here from right in the middle of the country is trying to find ways to help mitigate the damage going on out there. So that's one big project we have. The other big project is our bull sharks. And we have several research projects we've done over the years. My favorite being that National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration will come out. Bull sharks have the strongest bite force of any species of shark by size. So everybody wants to work with them, and we're the ones who have them and open our doors to really solid researchers.
What are you looking for in your study of the bull sharks?
Because they have that bite force that is so strong, most of the research that we do, well, first of all, we do a lot of research into how they pup and where they pup. We collect our own. So we go to the border of Texas and Louisiana, and it's almost completely salt or freshwater there, which is what makes bull sharks so unique. But what we really utilize our sharks for is trying to find ways to help save both human and shark populations.
Well, excuse me for interrupting, Ann, but are you saying that the bull sharks can survive in both fresh and salt water?
Yes. We're the only sharks we know of that can do that can live in either.
Wow, that's quite an interesting element. I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're fascinating sharks. Of course, I'm biased, but I love them.
Well, I wouldn't go that. I'd just like to know how they taste.
I have.
Have they discovered the bull sharks moving up into the fresh waterways?
So yeah, that's a really great question. They have found bull sharks 2,500 miles up the Amazon, 1,500 miles up the Mississippi. If they are looking for food, they will go inland, and they can go pretty far inland to search for that food.
Seems to me like, common sense tells me what you're probably going to end up doing, or maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, put electronic trackers on the sharks. Is that possible?
So we work with Texas Parks and Wildlife. They will tag bull sharks, and we do comparisons of bull sharks in captivity that are tagged as compared to growth patterns in sharks that go in the wild. We do not do tracking of animals in the wild, but we do track the data for the purpose of comparison. So, like I said, we work closely with Texas Parks and Wildlife in that capacity.
All very interesting stuff. And listen, keep us on your mailing list and in the back of your mind. And when things start to bubble up for you, please keep us advised, and let's get you back in here to talk about it, okay?
Oh, that sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ann. We'll talk to you down the road. We'll be back with more on Perspectives right after this. And our final guest is Bank of Oklahoma's financial chief investment strategist, Steve Wyett, with his outlook for 2025. Before we get into any of that, Steve, two things. Is Bank of Oklahoma back in business after the snafu of...
Well, thanks for bringing that up. This actually is a much bigger problem than BOK Financial. It actually impacts multiple financial institutions. It's a big national vendor for a lot of banks.
Well, I was going to say, it's not really the bank, it's the vendor.
It's a vendor.
That services the bank.
But I'm not totally, I'm not a spokesperson for the bank from that standpoint. My understanding is there's still some connectivity issues, but I know we're working hard to get those resolved as quickly as possible, and appreciate the patience that, and apologize for any inconvenience that's causing any of our clients. I understand that,
but I'll be glad to come over and babysit the money.
Yeah.
Last time you were here, which has been a while, your predictions, and I jokingly bounced off and said, the Democrats did it, but they did.
Well, as we talked a year ago, Sam, and we were looking into 2024, we had really four big themes that we were thinking was going to happen. Inflation was going to continue to come down, and it has. The Fed would begin to lower interest rates, and they did. Now, it took them a while. They didn't start lowering interest rates until September. We thought that economic growth would remain positive, and it did. In fact, we were growing above trend, 3% growth in the back half of the year, and we thought stocks would end the year higher. Now, as part of that, the reason that I said that was it was an election year, and so it really didn't. Anytime there's an election year, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Democratic administration or a Republican administration, they're both going to spend money to try and make the economy as good as possible. We spent 10% of GDP in federal spending last year, which is unsustainable over a longer period of time. And the fact is that if we weren't in a recession and we weren't at a time of war, it's just unbelievable that we spent that much money from a federal standpoint. So now, short term, that was a positive for growth. Longer term, we're now $36 trillion in debt, and we're going to have to deal with that as we move forward.
How many times, I'd love to know, how many times you looked at the numbers and said, who's minding the store?
Well, I've been in the investment business since 1982. We've been talking about it since then. I mean, go all the way back to when President Reagan really started building the deficit, and then you had the deficit hawks. And so we've been worried about government spending for a long time. And nothing bad has happened. And we're not in a crisis mode today, Sam. The economy's doing well. In some ways, if you look at how our economy has come out of the pandemic versus a lot of our trading partners, we've done so much better. And so there's a lot of positive aspects to that. But I think that this is where Now, as we move forward, a new administration, the way I would describe what we're looking at now is we're in a high change environment. There's going to be a lot of things that are changing. We've got policies, new policies coming on regulation, energy, tax policy, tariff policy, and immigration. 5 big areas that could really impact the economy as we move forward. On balance, we're more optimistic than pessimistic, but the implementation of some of these policies and how it's done is going to be really, really important.
I got to tell you, though, the tariff thing kind of concerns me.
I probably get more questions on tariffs than anything, and I'll be honest with you, that's not an issue that we're overly concerned about. There's 2 reasons really why that is, Sam. We have a little bit of history. President Trump in his first administration implemented some tariffs on China, and everybody's worried about what that would mean to import prices. And if you just look at import prices during that period of time, they did not go up. So how companies respond, how consumers respond can mute the actual impact of what the tariff is. The other part of this is that we think a big part of the rhetoric around tariffs, it's a negotiating tool. Now, you know how you make a negotiating tool effective? Be willing to do it. And this is where we have the advantage of President Trump's first administration, where he did this. And so think about the 25% tariff that he talked about with Mexico and Canada. That was less about an economic issue. We need them help from a social issue, be that on immigration or be that on the flow of illicit drugs. China's a different issue. They're an economic adversary. And so we do think that there's a better chance that tariffs on China are implemented and could be implemented relatively quickly. When we're talking about our other trading partners that tend to be more allies than not, this is probably a negotiating tool. Think about reciprocity. Think about President Trump has spoken many times about wanting a level playing field. And just as a specific example, in the Eurozone, we import a lot of cars from the Eurozone. Think of all the German cars, Italian cars come in, no tariffs. Every U.S. automaker that ships cars to Europe has a 2.5% tariff on it. Now, it's not a huge number, but they tariff an import for us to send to them that we don't tariff when they send to us. So this idea of reciprocity.
And there's a matter of fairness.
It's just fairness. Now, everybody wants in the U.S. market.
Yeah.
We're the biggest economy in the world. We're doing better than anywhere else. I think the administration is just saying, hey, let's just be fair about it.
Well, let me ask you, we got about 40 seconds. The issue of food, I mean, I hear more complaints about the price of groceries than I do anything. Is anything going on there?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, look, food prices historically are highly volatile. They move up and down quite a bit. Avian flu's really having an issue on egg prices at the present time. But in general, Sam, food prices are higher. And so we talk about inflation getting better, and it is. Aggregate inflation, the amount inflation has gone up since the onset of the pandemic today is about 21%. This is what consumers are feeling. So you and I see it. When I talk to my wife, she goes to the grocery store, I'm carrying 2 handfuls of sacks. It's $250 worth of groceries.
Exactly.
And not just that, you open the bag of chips that you bought and it's 3/4 air. So you get the shrinkflation kind of thing going as well.
And
so
eggs are off the chart.
well, like I said, that's avian flu, and we'll get through that. But overall, price levels, food, energy, insurance, housing. Your previous guest talking about housing really that's a very difficult topic to solve. But all of this, I'm gonna say this without we're apolitical in our approach. But inflation was a key aspect of why there was a change in the presidential race election back in November. Most consumers were feeling that. They're paying more and they're getting less, and their standard of living had declined. And that was a big reason for the change.
I just want to pay my cable bill.
Well, that too. And then you could cut the cable though, and then you start adding up all of your streaming services, and you end up paying more anyway. So
Get a dish, maybe use a pie plate. Listen, hey, thanks for coming by.
Sam, thank you. I'd love another chance to visit with you anytime.
We'll do it
Thank
down
you.
the road, and maybe sooner than you think.
And stay optimistic. The economy's better than we think. Yeah, stay optimistic.
All right, we're all out of time. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.